Representative Anna Paulina Luna says she has documents, JFK assassination documents from the Russians. This is her announcing that she was going to be receiving them.
Can you give us any new developments on what's maybe taking place from the intelligence community?
I actually have a very big one. Yeah, so actually I have a very, very big one. I just found out earlier today that for the first time since the assassination of Kennedy, that the Russian government has agreed to deliver documents pertaining to their independent investigation into who killed JFK. What's been interesting about that is in the 90s, when Congress tried to obtain those documents, the Russian government denied those documents to them, and they are actually hand delivering those to us. And so that will be uploaded. We're going to be doing it through the Mary Farrell Foundation. I'm also going to be giving a copy to the National Archives. And we actually are bringing on people that can translate those documents so the American people can see what the parallel investigation from foreign intelligence actually said on the assassination. So we know via some of our findings, Radcliffe has done an incredible job with releasing the information that actually largely does show that the CIA not only lied and blocked Congress's efforts to investigate the assassination, but also too that, they had some not so good people over at the agency who I do believe were implicated in the assassination of President Kennedy. So.
Okay, well, the Russians did give her the documents. They're in Russian. What do you expect? So they gave her, the document is 386 pages long. The ambassador of Russia gave the Russian investigation into JFK's assassination to Representative Anna Paulina Luna. She then posted these online. They're in Russian. We did kind of go through, we didn't have time today to read 386 pages. So we kind of did a skim. So we translated them and skimmed them for pretty much an understanding of what the documents say. And I think the documents say what you would expect them to say about the assassination of JFK from a Russian perspective, which is, we didn't do it. That's essentially what the Russians are saying. They're saying, we didn't do it. I mean, all of us were hoping for some major big bombshell. But here's essentially what happened in these documents. Says that this is a summary of the 386 pages. U.S.-Soviet relations were improving following the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. In June of 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered his Strategy of Peace speech advocating nuclear disarmament and cooperation with the USSR. Khrushchev and the Soviet press responded positively. Pravda published the full text. In August of 1963, the U.S., UK, and USSR signed the Moscow Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Both sides maintained limited back-channel contacts in anticipation of further arms control talks. Khrushchev learned of Kennedy's assassination while at his residence outside of Moscow on November 22, 1963. He immediately contacted Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko and the Soviet ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Dobrinin. The Soviet leadership feared that the U.S. might suspect Soviet or Cuban involvement. So that is why the Soviets decided to investigate the assassination of JFK. They did that because they worried that, oh no, they are going to blame us for this. So we better get on this and take a look, especially when they heard that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who was involved and that he had spent time in the Soviet Union, had defected to the Soviet Union. So the Soviets were really concerned about this. They were really worried that this would be pinned on them. Said that Khrushchev directed that official condolences be sent and a delegation attend the funeral. He stated a president must be buried by a president. Deputy Premier Anstas Mikoyan was chosen to represent the USSR at the funeral in Washington. From November 25th to 23rd to 25th, Dobrinin informed Moscow that the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had previously lived in the USSR from 1959 to 1962. Khrushchev ordered the Foreign Ministry and KGB to collect all records related to Oswald. So this is when the Russians really opened up their investigation, was they were like, oh shit, they're going to blame us. Oswald lived in the Soviet Union. This is going to be terrible for relations. The Kremlin assessed that the revelation could trigger anti-Soviet hysteria in the United States. Oswald's Soviet file was reviewed and transmitted to senior officials within 24 hours. So late November of 1963, the findings that they had gathered. They said Oswald lived in Minsk from 1959 to 1962 after defecting from the U.S. Marines. He worked in a radio electronics plant, married a Russian citizen, Marina Pruskova, and repeatedly sought to return to the U.S. Soviet authorities found him politically inconsistent, emotionally unstable, and of little intelligence value. He was not recruited or tasked by Soviet security services. After he left the USSR in 1962, there was no further contact between Oswald and Soviet agencies. The internal conclusion: Oswald acted alone and without Soviet assistance. But I mean, what else do you expect these documents to say from the Russians? I mean, would you expect them to be like, yeah, we did an investigation, and by the way, we did find that Oswald, when he defected to the Soviet Union, we actually did recruit him. We actually did use him for a couple of things. I mean, they're not going to say that, because then it's going to imply that maybe then they used him for this, to assassinate JFK, and then they're kind of perhaps implicated in this. So I don't really expect the Russians to be totally transparent when they hand over documents to Representative Anna Paulina Luna, right? But nonetheless, it's interesting just to see what they say about all of this. Okay. Then it says... Then in late November, also, the USSR sent condolence telegrams to Jacqueline Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and President Lyndon B. Johnson. Mikoyan attended the Washington funeral and delivered Khrushchev's written condolences. The Soviet government instructed its diplomats and press to avoid speculation and to emphasize grief and stability. Internal reports expressed concern that the extremist factions in the U.S. might exploit the murder to derail detente. In 1964... the dossier includes records of continued diplomatic contact between Moscow and Washington during the Warren Commission investigation. The USSR offered to share information on Oswald's time in Minsk if requested. Soviet officials cooperated with the transfer of minor archival materials to the future Kennedy Presidential Library. Moscow's priority was to prevent the assassination from damaging the limited progress made in nuclear arms negotiations. The publication, then the editorial summary, this is just what they ended up saying in the whole thing. The publication compiles previously classified Soviet documents from the Presidential Archive of the Russian Federation and related ministries. And the editors state, for the first time, on a strict documentary basis, we show the active assistance of the Soviet authorities in the investigation of this crime. No alternative assassination or conspiracy is suggested in these. Wah, wah. We were all hoping for something good, right? We ended up getting, we didn't do it. Yet. The official Soviet position reflected throughout the documents is that Lee Harvey Oswald was solely responsible. The USSR had no involvement or prior knowledge. The Soviet leadership viewed Kennedy's death as a serious blow to world peace and U.S.-Soviet cooperation. So, like I said, that is to be expected from the Soviets, that they come back and say, we weren't involved. I don't think, though, any of us that are alive to, I don't think any of us that don't believe the official narrative, I don't think we're really pointing the finger at the Russians. So I think that's also why the Russians felt like, we'll just release this to you, because all it says is we didn't do it. We investigated Lee Harvey Oswald. We didn't have any connection to him. Again, we didn't get to read the full 386 pages of this document. So it's possible that there's better stuff in this. We just have to go through it a lot deeper, kind of like 10 pages at a time, and see if there's like a little nugget or a little gem in there. So we'll certainly try to go through and do that to see if there's, or we'll wait. There's a lot of Russian speakers, a lot of native Russians that will read it, and then they'll start posting, their findings from being able to read these documents. I think what a lot of us would have liked to see, it's kind of how much investigation can Russia really do? Probably not that much, because they're in Russia and this was a U.S. assassination on U.S. soil. The only thing they could really investigate was Lee Harvey Oswald. However, I think that's what we all would have liked to see a little bit more of, is certainly you must have investigated this guy. Certainly you must have some dirt on him, because you don't end up with some American Marine showing up on your shore being like, I'm defecting, and you haven't done a background check on the guy. You didn't really do your due diligence, maybe even follow him around a little bit to find out if he was a double agent. It seems to me that it would be odd for them to just say, we just thought the guy was a lunatic, and so we just let him go. We just, whatever, like he's just some loony that was just living here. I'm certainly that's always possible. But I think many of us, what we'd like to see is a little bit of a deeper probe into Lee Harvey Oswald. It would have been great if the Russians came out and said, yeah, this guy was, we did an investigation into him. We found that he had connections to the CIA. We found that he had connections to, all these various different organizations, outlets. We found that the guy was a shit shot. There was no way he was going to make that shot. I mean, it would have been great if he just would, if the Russians would have come out and said something that I think verified that there is more to the story. And instead, they're just like, it wasn't us. And all we know is we just think Lee Harvey Oswald did it. That's all we know. That's what, because, if you're going to sit there and say, what else are they going to say? Like I said, because if you're going to say, well, we investigated Lee Harvey Oswald and there's no way he could have done it. That's not really it's not a very good diplomatic position for Russia to be in. The official U.S. narrative is that Lee Harvey Oswald did it, and that's the end of the story. And that's the official government, that's the government line. So if you're trying to be diplomatic with the Americans, you're not going to say, actually, we think you're just full of it. And by the way, you guys didn't land on the moon either. They're not going to say these things because they want to keep diplomatic relations with the United States. So they're just going to say, yep, okay, your narrative's all right. And they're just going to leave it to the rest of the American sleuths to go around and say, these pieces don't add up. This isn't aligning. And, you guys are feeding us a bunch of bull. So, but it's important to remember, because I think some people might look at these documents and say, see, case closed. Even the Russians said Lee Harvey Oswald did it. But then you have to think, well, what do they know? I mean, they don't know anything because they couldn't investigate here in the United States. All they were interested in investigating was, did we do it? Did somebody in our realm do this? And if so, would they even admit it if that's what they had discovered? If the Russians had discovered that, yep, Lee Harvey Oswald was part of a Russian ring and actually it was the Russians that killed JFK, do you think they would even admit that? And like I said, they're not going to admit that, well, we don't think he did it either because that's bad for diplomatic relations with the United States. So they're just going to, there's no reason to go against the diplomatic line. It's kind of like how everybody with China, all the countries will just say, yep, Taiwan's China. Or if they want to be on the good side of the United States, they'll say, nope, Taiwan's not China. Whatever narrative they want to take, people take certain stances, countries take certain stances just depending on their diplomatic relationship with that country. So there is no benefit for Russia to say, we actually don't think Lee Harvey Oswald did this. We investigated the guy, there's no way he did this. How would that benefit the Russians at all? So of course they're not going to come out and say that because it would only do damage to their diplomatic relationship with the United States. And it's just not a big enough interest of theirs to care who killed JFK. None of their business. They don't care. They're like, oh, you want to poison your wife? Go ahead. That's the Russian mentality. None of my business. That's between you two. And that's, I think, their stance on this. So much to be, it is disappointing. We all wanted to see a little bit more than what we got. But essentially at this point, the summary of the Russian JFK assassination documents they're handed to Representative Anna Paulina Luna was, we didn't do it. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.